right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to ArCOna. Oh no, I'm already messed this up. I'm sorry. But yeah, welcome back. ArCOna benefits bad conversation. Oh no,
Conversation
bad
too.
con- conservation international's mission to end bat extinctions worldwide. Bats are night pollinators and they're critical to our ecosystem. So please donate and support our fundraiser. You can find the donate link in the chat. Thanks, buds, and below this stream. And our stream has a special bat fact, which is bats range in size from the bumblebee bat that weighs less than a penny to the flying foxes, which have a wingspan of up to 6 feet. That's so cool.
Could you imagine a flying fox giving a bumblebee bat a hug?
Now
And I am
can.
now.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that the
And I'm-
cutest thing you've ever thought about? Ugh.
Can you imagine one giving you a hug?
I
That's
want
great.
hugs from them, but don't hug bats. Don't hug them.
Yeah, you're right.
But I will imagine it. It's a very like fleshy hug. Is that weird? Anyway,
It's like a fleshy, furry hug.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
like flesh on the torso and then like these leathery like couch vinyl wings wrapping around your shoulders. What a delight.
I imagine it'd be like someone wearing just a leather cloak giving you an embrace.
Oh,
Mhm.
it's just like it's like never mind. Mm-mm.
Like not a whole lot of mass, but a lot of coverage.
That's really cute.
On that note, hello everyone. We are doing a panel called The Hag Beyond the Tropes, which I am super excited for. Before we actually get started and we talk a little bit about our topic, I would just like everyone to briefly introduce themselves and say where we can find you. I am going to start with Paladin.
Oh no, I was gonna copy how the other two did it. Hi, I'm Paladin. You can find me on Twitter under HD Paladin. I'm a TTRPG bookmaker. I guess that's what I do now, because golly, I'm busy these days. I just do a lot of research into old world stuff for my books.
Awesome. Rachel.
I'm Rachel. You can find me at Ms. Petty Dreadful on Twitter and Instagram and on the Table Goth channel if you want to see me playing TTRPG streams. Right now, I'm currently finishing up my master's in Gothic Lit. So I also love the kind of like old stories, spooky stories. So I'm excited to be here.
And TK.
Hello, I appreciate you not calling on me while I was attempting to like drink the steam off of my hot tea and test how hot it was.
I'll make sure to catch
remember
you
that
next
forever.
time.
No, I'll remember that forever, and I'll send blessings upon your family. I'm TK Johnson. I'm a horror writer. I also write for a couple of TTRPG publishers. Right now I'm in the marketing department at Roll20. I guess that's really it. Fun fact. My degree was in history with a minor in religious studies with a focus on folklore and fairy tales.
Did you say where we could find you?
Twitter. TK joins the fray.
All right.
I forgot that part.
I'm Liz. I'm moderator. You can find me on Twitter at Angry Hamster RPG. I am a roleplay publisher. I have my own company, Angry Hamster Roleplaying, Angry Hamster Publishing, and I also work for a bunch of companies. And the coolest thing that I'm working on right now, I find, is the Avatar roleplay game. So excited about that.
That's so exciting.
It is exciting. But yeah, let's talk about the Hag. When Lisa was like presenting these topics, I was most excited about this panel. So I'm really excited to get your guys' opinion on everything. The first thing I want to go into to talk a little bit about is defining the Hag. So what does the term Hag mean to you? And like, do you have examples from history, for example? I mean, TK, I'm going to pick on you because you said you have this really cool background on
Let's do it.
in folklore. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. And actually I'm a root worker and hoodoo, and hags play a big role for us, but mostly as a neutral to positive. experience in our tradition. There are creatures like the buhad, or the buhag, or like the sukran, or like the obeah, which, not to be confused with the religious obeah priestesses. Those are all considered mythological creatures and not so much considered hags. The role of like more hag types that you would see in like European folklore, for hoodoo and West African folklore, those are usually taken up by like elders in the village and stuff. So like babas and yayas. For hoodoo, those are considered aunties, doctors. Sometimes you'll see them. It's usually aunties, doctors, and I'm so sorry, like a doctors, and there's like one more that you usually see for like mama, things like that. And you see that time and again for Western African traditions that are in America. If you watch the movie The Princess and the Frog, the character, the little character, the lady in the woods, Mama Odie, she would be considered a hag.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a very like positive experience. Or we would consider like from the movie Willow, and they go and they find what's her name, the older woman, that would be considered like a hag character, even though most Western traditions would consider her more of a sorceress. So yeah, that's where a lot of like my pulling for hags are. For European traditions, I think I see hags mostly as a negative experience, a woman who is withered beyond her usefulness to patriarchal society, and whose magic is typically malicious. Yeah. I hope some of that made sense. I'm sorry.
No, that made total sense. It's interesting, like what you're saying, because it redefined, like as you're talking, you're kind of redefining my view. Because like when I think of like literally the word hag, immediately I go like, the old crone type character in my mind. Because like the examples like that you've given, for example, and I can think of like in my own culture, I don't tend to, my mind doesn't go to hag, I think because I have that kind of Western definition so drilled into my mind that I'm like, oh no, but that's just like an elder, like you said, or that's a woman with power, or a person with power, or whatever. So I love that. That's so interesting. But I'm the moderator. Rachel, how's it going? Defining the hag. What does
TK,
hag
that's
mean?
definitely like also a super kind of different perspective than when I was coming at it with, of like having this like really like blatantly positive, and not sort of like, when I think of a hag and a positive association with, I think of maybe it's more of like a crone figure, of like this really old, like seen as like ugly by modern beauty standards, and but like wise and powerful. Whereas I think like the term hag is maybe more malevolent, and crone is maybe more just like kind of a neutral, maybe she's going to help you, maybe she's going to harm you, but she'll give you what you want at the cost, which I think kind of comes back to like, in my mind, to like Greek mythology, where you have like the fates and all of these like older women in threes who are sort of like doling out advice, but for a cost. Whereas I think like hags maybe comes from that in the Western tradition, but sort of making that power that they have and that like wisdom they have being like really malevolent or evil, in a way that like through folklore kind of puts them on the outside, puts these like older women at the outskirts of society, in a way that I think is super interesting and definitely worth examining. So yeah.
Definitely. I mean, you said like it puts those women on the outskirts of society. Like do you want to delve into that a little bit? Like I'm interested in like
sure.
what you like, that sparks something in me,
Oh yeah. So I'm just thinking of like these kind of medieval or older folk stories where they have like this old evil woman, and she's like a lot of times like Hansel and Gretel, like she's gonna eat the children. Like she's here, and it's sort of like this like maybe perversion of like motherhood, where you want a woman to be like married, keep a house, you know, live in society in this way. And what is like the horrific version of that is she's going to fatten these kids up and eat them. And so it's kind of like flipping that to be like motherhood is good and holy, and the antithesis of that is ugly and evil and something that we should stay away from.
It's really strange how like, a lot of these themes that come back in terms of like when you're demonizing the hag is indeed what you said, kind of like the exact opposite of motherhood. It's like, then this woman has no purpose anymore, and therefore she eats children. Like,
Oh my
you know
God.
what I mean?
Can I
TK,
say like
do you want to say
one thing?
something?
I'm so sorry.
No,
I don't
yeah,
want to
no.
jump it. It just
No,
like
do.
sparked in something in me as well, of like in many stories where women are like benevolent sorceresses, they are also not main players in the story. And so thus when the hag is the enemy, it is because the sorceress has accepted that she as a woman is disposable and thus not necessary to the story, whereas the hag must be taught that she is disposable. She must be taught her place, either through violence or reconditioning.
Yeah.
well,
Ooh.
yeah,
Ooh.
and kind of jumping off that a little bit is like this idea of like the hag versus sorceress is such an like a good and interesting point to bring up, because in a lot of stories like the hag will reveal herself to be beautiful, and it's like, oh, just kidding, actually I'm good, this was a moral test, I'm here to teach you a lesson, now I'm pretty, this is the reward, let me get out of your way and you continue.
Yep.
And that's such a, to talk about like being disposable, like I am here for this purpose.
Mhm.
Yeah. Paladin, defining the hag. What does the term hag mean to you?
Generally, I mean, I grew up around a lot of people who were very vocally Christian, which is a very nice way of saying like one level below cultist. Um, and hag usually came from them trying to talk for the Bible, which is weird because hag isn't found in the Bible. Um, like you find Hagar, but not actually hag. So like, I always heard as them trying to say that it takes the place of the nightmare, or it takes the place of just an older woman. Um, I did a bunch of research for a book about pre-colonial myths, and we came across this figure called the Hukleman, which has that kind of archetypal of older woman who has very powerful magic. And we always found two versions of it, where it was just an older womanly figure who you really had to respect her of what at all costs because she had specifically power over death, or that but added on to a servant of Satan, which was kind of this uh deity that later got co-opted by colonizers as a stand-in for Satan. So it became very clear which was actually pre-colonial and which one was trying to be co-opted. So for me, when I hear hag, I generally think of people who are trying to expand the Bible's narrative for an agenda.
Oh, wow.
Can I ask a question off that?
Sure.
Yeah. So like the idea of like a woman like writing her name in the devil's book, like in your research, is that like kind of where that idea comes from with like colonial women, or like colonial or post-colonial rather?
So like when the Spanish came to the Philippines, they did a whole lot of, oh, don't you see what you're doing right now? That's already in the Bible. Here's how. And so
Okay.
anything that they were doing, they would try and spin it as being part of their good narrative or their bad narrative. Um, I didn't see any references specifically to that, but if it was brought up, it would have been brought up as like, oh, see, what you're doing is bad.
Okay, cool. I was just honestly just thinking of The Witch, which is a great horror movie. Do you like that kind of stuff?
I do, but like a lot of that stuff very comes from like people who came to America who are very, very like traditionally Christian, as they call themselves, and then wrote fan fiction for their own religion. That's the only way I know how to put it. Yeah. Also, I didn't have a time to say this before we started, but like, I found out that one of the root things for witch was just the word sorcerer, and that's frustrating to hear when hearing about like there's sorcerers and stories who are in the story naturally, and then there's which has to be reviled.
Mhm.
It bothers me.
It's interesting to see in some texts where witch has been taken from a local word for a poisoner. So it's like, well, why didn't you just put poisoner in there then? Is this a fancier poisoner? Did they go to a special school? Do they have a diploma? What is
It not to diminish it, but it feels very proto incel.
yeah. Yeah, I don't love it.
Yeah. I mean, that's I'm gonna go on to the next question. So I kind of I took this from a gaming perspective, but I mean, I think we can expand upon this as well, not to like break away from audience from the list of questions that I sent everyone and I told them we'd be talking about. um, but yeah, so like I mean, hags are often portrayed as hideous women who flout society, often mirroring women who break away from the roles that society has set for them, which we've talked about. So I mean, like I think my main question is when I think about this is because anytime I see a hag in fiction, immediately, no matter if she's eating babies like in Hansel and Gretel or whatever, I'm like, she's awesome. I'm here for her because there's something within me that resonates with her in a very deep way. I mean, so my question is like, are hags actually the true villains, or is it, the kind of this society around them? Because like for example, like in D&D, I find that they try, especially in like in fifth edition now, they've come a lot further, but like they very much paint hags as like, no, but they really are evil. Like, and they spend a lot of time trying to do that. And I think like, are there worlds where things can be that black and white, or are we coming to a place in kind of our fantasy realms in which, they can't truly be evil? Are they truly villains?
Never mind. Call on someone. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
What?
If
No.
you had someone you wanted to call on.
Well, I was gonna pick on all of you guys like different so that I didn't always start with the same person. But TK, go ahead. Because I was like, I don't like going first. That's why. So, but if you want to go first, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, no problem. There are different there's a lot of like issues with intersectionality already in like portrayals of hags and portrayals of hags, particularly in Dungeons and Dragons. Please don't stop writing my checks. Well, number one being like the difference between things like the green hag and the night hag. The green hag is more of your Finn Rizal, or like your sort of like fairy queen and stuff like that. And because they are from the Feywild, they can be more like morally gray, whereas your night hag are specifically fiends and maybe draw a little too much from Jewish stereotypes from the medieval times, and also have dark skin and like wild hair, which I don't appreciate. And those are more likely to be like your Tituba's, or your Mother Suspiria type hags, which are great movies, by the way. Well, Suspiria is a good movie. Anyway, but it's. Do I think hags are naturally villains? No, because I don't ascribe to any sort of like bioessentialism. Do I think that they are easy targets? Yeah, because there's no easier way to engage an adventuring party in a game where they give you a box of knives and tell you to solve all your problems with it than giving them a monster to fight. And so I don't think that in every fantasy world hags are villains. And a lot of my sort of like experience with hags also comes from like my experience with like the magical Negro trope and stuff, where any black femme or black woman that uses magic to help white heroes is almost immediately like an older black woman or an older black man, so they have no choice but to fall in the hag sort of box. Do I think they're villains? No, I think they can be very beneficial, but I also don't, I rarely see them as heroes, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that's what I struggle with too, is that like we have a lot of like magical men, I guess, that are allowed to have kind of these depths of character where they're both like, like they have like, the hag-esque, like the evil hag-esque qualities to them, but they have like a depth of character which we never get to see in fantasy tropes from the female hag, which
Yeah.
always really strikes me. And like immediately in my mind, like when I resonate with this character, I start like building her backstory. I'm like,
Yeah.
but there's things that happen. You don't understand why she's like this. There's
Yeah.
a reason that she's doing this, But it's like I think that's a lot of mental exercise that I do to rewrite fiction that maybe isn't there in the fantasy narrative
Yeah,
as we see it.
absolutely. A lot of the bioessentialist evil tendencies of and traits of the hag are attributed to either undesirable traits that we find in women and femmes or racist superstitions about other races. And so it's like, all right, I guess. All right, I'm done now.
Let's make it up. Paladin. What about you, Hugo?
Uh, there's this whole thing I see online a lot where people ask who would win, Batman or Superman, and the best answer I see, which kind of closes down the argument, is whoever's writing the script. So in a vacuum, the only reason why a hag has to be evil is because someone wants them to always be evil. Just because, I don't know, I'm very bored of black and white morality at this point, but I'm also exhausted by people trying to put endless shades of gray. So at this point, I think, no, you don't have to have them as evil. I think if you are grasping at straws and you got nothing left in the tank for an inspiration and you don't want to use demon number 5, sure, make an evil hag, but that's because that hag in particular is evil, you know. Going back to that Huckleberry thing that I referenced earlier, um, we never found anything that said that she was naturally evil. Nothing that said that she was naturally aggressive or trying to kill everybody. She wanted to either be left alone or unbothered by people, which
Yo,
isn't a sin.
same.
Yeah, no, like, um, and every time she's wronged or bothered or annoyed by someone, yes, you happen to upset someone who had power over death. There's going to be consequences to that. But it wasn't like she hunted you down and your children and your next of kin for no reason, like a cartoon villain. It's because you messed with her somehow. That's not evil. That's just you. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, I don't know.
You forked up.
You forked
Yeah.
up. There we go.
Some
Hecked
swears are
around
okay.
and found out.
Some
get it.
swears are okay, says Lisa Penrose.
PG-13.
Okay, so you forked up somehow, and you happen to fork up with someone who can and will kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It's also, I think that you hit on something that like often hags tend to have like these like non-feminine characteristics in terms of like being violent, for example, which we don't necessarily in common media attribute to like a woman or something like that, to the feminine scope when like it's ridiculous. Rachel, why don't you tell us a little bit? What do you think?
Yeah, jumping off kind of what Paladin said about like whoever's telling the story is kind of in control of whether or not the hags are evil. I think it just comes down to like I think an evil hag can be really, really fun, but I personally want to know like what about her is evil, and if it is the same like she's ugly and mean, I'm kind of bored of that. I want to take it into a more interesting direction because that's like pretty harmful to say like these traits that have been considered ugly are also a reflection of like the evil within, it's like that's totally harmful, especially to people who might share some of those like physical traits, and it's very ableist. It can be very ableist in a lot of ways too. So I want to look at, you know, how can we make this more complicated, because kind of just strictly adhering to like if we're focusing on like the D&D rule book here, the monster manual, and you're just working with like a little section this big with stats, and you're using that to reflect someone who might reflect people in the real world in some way, like that doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so I think, no, they shouldn't be inherently evil. I think they should also be able to be given the ability to be evil or to be an enemy of your party. Let them be complicated in your story, I guess, is kind of where I'm coming from.
Any sentient creature has the ability to choose, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of what you said, TK. What did you say? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was saying any sentient creature has like the ability to like choose, you know?
Choose, yeah. Yeah, I like what you say, like Rachel, like does speak to me as well, because I remember like if when we're talking about like D&D, like we played through Infinite and we played through Ravenloft. And I remember finishing Ravenloft and being like, our party was actually the biggest monsters in Ravenloft. Because like I remember when we encountered Babula Saga, and we just, I don't know why, because we were, I don't know, bored. You know how things go. So I'm like, why did we kill this person? Like legit, we just came into her house, messed up some things. I think she might have had someone hostage, but like I don't know why she had someone hostage, and we just killed her. And I'm like, wow, I don't feel good. Like at the end of that, like that comment, I'm like, I don't feel good about this. I feel like maybe we should have tried to talk to her. I don't know if the encounter would have like allowed that, but like I definitely felt morally strange about it, essentially.
Yeah, I always like the idea of like negotiating with any sentient like creature of like, especially if they're, you know, traditionally considered evil, like what kind of understanding in this story, and whether that's like if I'm GM and I'm running the game and I want to give the characters the ability to like have that conversation, or I'm a player and I want to see like, okay, what is this, what story are we in, what are the rules here, I'm going to try to negotiate and see how this conversation can go. And I always think that can be really, really fun, instead of just being like, we're gonna throw some swords at this problem. Let's kind of delve into this, especially when it's a creature like a hag that's like very explicitly feminine and kind of used over and over again the same way.
Yeah, I mean, that dovetails nicely into like my second question, and maybe like TK, you brushed upon it, and my question was like, why do we think that there are no male hags? Because we have men who have magical powers who are evil, but they're never really in this category of hag. But you mentioned something, TK, in what you said, that like actually sometimes when there are men of color, they are kind of put into that hag stereotype, and that's something interesting for me that I hadn't considered before. Like, is that something you can speak more on?
So, like, and Dungeons and Dragons has had male hags before, which are known as
Oh,
hag spawn. Hag spawn are the
okay.
rare male offspring of like what is considered an entirely female culture. And you see a lot of that in even in contemporary storytelling. Let's say Star Wars. Anybody a Star Wars fan? If you know anything about planet Dathomir and how rare like male force users on planet Dathomir are, and I would absolutely put the witches of Dathomir like more in that hag sort of coven area, or even Son of a Witch, which was a Gregory Maguire book that was meant to be a sequel to
Yes.
Wicked. And this idea that like, oh, there's all these women and stuff, but then the male magic user has the chance to like rise up and change that legacy and stuff, and it's like very chosen one. Or you have like with gosh, whatever that one, the sword one with the girls, the women that had like the Mord Sith and stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, these women are so powerful and magical, and oh gosh, Sword of Truth. And there's like one guy in that group of women magic users that's born like every 100 years, and it's like, man, okay, I guess. And so you do see male hags, but they're only when male hags are born into hagdom or the hag culture, they're always there to rewrite the legacy. I would go so far as to say Ganon from Legend of Zelda, who's born in an all-female culture and is destined to lead them, because of course he is. Why wouldn't he? Men who are born into that culture of women who shirk patriarchy are always destined to bring them back in the fold. And the reason that men aren't hags, as we would consider hags, which is a punishment of women who walk outside of the patriarchal fold, is because men aren't punished like that. They aren't punished for those things. And if being a hag in a traditional European story is a punishment, men find punishments in other ways. Men are praised for violence. Men are praised for walking outside of the rules of the kingdom. Either they'll become king, or they take down the king, or they found their own kingdom. When they want to be the heroes of their own stories, they're applauded for it. And those are all things that for hags, they have to be punished for. So you won't see a male hag in that sort of same type of thing, unless it's specifically like as a medicine man or a juju man, or you know, or like an old wise hermit that lives in the woods and stuff. But none of those are considered punishments. They're just eccentric.
They're eccentric, exactly.
Exactly. They're foreign, they're exotic. And so they're bad for an entirely different reason, but it's not misogynistic. And the entire point of having hags as villains in your story is usually to carry on a legacy of misogyny that has been reflected upon by that culture. Whether or not that's your intention as the writer, that's fine. But you have to understand where the foundation of these characters kind of comes from in a European tradition.
Yeah, definitely. Rachel, like, I mean, like, are there any touchstones of male hags that you've seen, or do you have anything to add to
Yeah, I think so. Jumping off what I keep saying, jumping off, and that's just how I'm going to start all my answers, I guess. But what TK said about like it's a way to kind of like reinforce this like misogynistic idea, or to like represent deviations from like the patriarchal norm as something that's like monstrous, is there's kind of, for me, like hags have like two things that make them monstrous, and one is like a grotesque, like a deviation from things that are feminine, or like taking on something masculine. So like doing violence, having power, having some kind of like ambition, which would be considered like a very masculine thing, or their like proximity to children. Vanity is a big thing, where you see like hags are super vain, and these things where it's explicitly like commentary on things that we don't want to see women doing. And so to see a male hag would be really weird, because it's either you're putting like feminine traits on a man, which is considered monstrous but in a different way, and we see that in like different kind of figures, or doing things we expect men to do anyway, and it's their place to be doing it. So to have a male hag, I would be interested to see someone like run a game where you have male hags in that sort of like traditional way, and what that would look like. But I think from like a folklore perspective, and just like the stories that we tell, we don't see that very often, just because of what a hag is.
Yeah, like by their nature.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense to me. Paladin?
I guess I'm laughing internally because like you have the Ganon archetype where the man of the race finally shows up and leads Mel in a different direction. But remembering Hexspawn were just awful creatures that were like abandoned at birth, and just cast aside. They weren't any better at magic. They just were known as Hagspawn because they looked hideous and they're just very brutish. And it's like the anti-canon.
Actually, yeah, now that I think about it, yes.
Yeah, they were just
yeah.
yeah. It's like there's that one gif of like someone made an edit of a Lion King gif of like Rafiki holding up Simba
Yeah, he
and
throws
just
him off.
flinging it like full arm flinging it off of Pride Rock, and that's all I can think of with a hag spawn. But the reason I don't think we really see male hags in fifth edition, because hag spawns were like from third edition
Oh
in a
yeah.
dungeon magazine, not a core book. It's because D&D is very slow to adapt mythology well, because you have hags and they're focused very focused on magic crone woman. You have dragons which are very focused on like big magic winged lizard. You have the Tarask, which if you have the time, anybody, please look up the actual Tarask from French mythology, because it's hilariously awkward. Because it's supposed to be this six bare legs, a lion's a turtle shell, a lion's head, and a scorpion tail.
Medieval like bestiaries are incredible.
I would love to see it. I don't want to be the person who has to ever work on it though, because that would be frustrating as heck. Um and I have this kind of point of like, I don't want to keep going back to this book I made, but in this book I made, we researched a thing called the Burbelong. And the Burbelong appears in most versions of D&D. And in the first edition, second edition, it was this chubby, horny imp that could like send out its actual form, and that's how it would procreate with other Burbelongs. In fourth edition, it became this imp that can make copies of itself and then set those copies to explode as if it's from Naruto. And in fifth edition, you now have these large, medium-sized imp creatures that roam around dead gods and eat their bodies to try and get their memories. When in reality, a Burbelong was this horrific thing in Filipino mythology. And it focused very much on, okay, it can send its spirit out. Let's focus on that and only that. And so when you have hags in D&D, they focus squarely on female and not attractive, and can look attractive and has magic. And that's what they really focused on when they weren't making hag spawn, which they make me giggle. They don't look right.
I feel like I also saw hag spawn in a whenever like White Wolf had a license to D&D for third edition. Am I misremembering? Because I feel like I saw terrible art for it. Remember? Do you remember when White Wolf had the Ravenloft license?
I do. I'm remembering now.
I'm like 90% sure that it was bad art, and it was, you just look at it and you're just like, oh man.
They had hag spawn in Unapproachable East.
No.
They had hag spawn in Unapproachable East. That's why I don't think about it. Unapproachable East was.
Imagine in your mind, real quick, what Unapproachable East.
Okay, so it is.
I don't want to.
I'm saying yikes.
Yeah.
Is it what I think it is?
Lean into the bad feelings. Lean into the bad feelings.
Okay, this seems like a Google hole I'm gonna fall down before bed now.
Horrible.
Yeah. Every single bad notion of when you refer to anybody Asian as Eastern.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like when White Wolf had the Ravenloft license in third edition, that was like mid 90s, mid to late 90s, I want to say. And so any horror tropes that you can think from that time that portrayed to anything that's like maybe east of Southern Arabia, like
we're all gonna take a 5-minute break and we'll be back.
Like I can already see the art for the Jiangshi like in my head from that book, actually. And it's
I'm remembering the tagline, which was "Explore a mysterious land of might and magic."
Stop it! A mysterious land. What was the font choice?
I think they had to stick to non-chopstick font. I think at that point they at least knew not to use those fonts.
Oh, I'm so proud of them.
But the cover definitely had a bunch of men trying to fight some skeleton using magic, and clearly they're going to die. Because it's mysterious.
Wonton number 4. No.
Green Mer Dragon, I see you. I don't like what you're saying, but I see you.
Yeah.
Oh no. Okay, I'm not gonna look at the chat now.
All right, we'll
yeah,
get
I mean,
into that
still
another time.
yes.
Bad for different reasons.
I hear what y'all are saying. Like I one thing that has recently so any excuse to talk about my child. A year and a half ago, I became a mom, like a human mom. And one thing that really got me thinking about was like female societies, as we see, like all female societies as we see them, and how they immediately need to reject, like, you know what I mean? It's like, if we have the Amazons, like they don't keep the male babies, you know what I mean? And it's like, if we have the hags, they just chuck them into the swamp and they become hag spawn. Like, and it's interesting when we think of these societies, and you know, they're often like, you know, they're often female societies which go against what we stereotypically think of women, to the point where we also have to chuck away our male babies, which is just so strange now that, like, I think about being a parent. I'm like, no child doesn't, like, first of all, you don't know what your child is when they're born. You're just like, here's baby and it's adorable and it's a little squishy thing. And like, I'm like, no one would do that. Like, why are we chucking away our babies? Like, I don't know.
I think it ties back into like this like perversion of the like maternal of like they're just gonna leave their sons, which it's like, absolutely. If you look back, especially like in like more Western folklore, like the importance of raising your son as a mother, like that's the most important thing you can do, is like have a boy and then raise the child.
Yeah, and I'll take that like a slight step further and say, because you brought up the Amazons, there was the pervading myth for so long that Amazons burned off one of their breasts to make it easier for them to shoot bows, even though but yeah, like the idea. And so there's further, I hate this, they're committing further perversions towards like a motherhood instinct by taking away what would typically feed a child, and also making themselves less desirable to men, as though that mattered. And it's just like wild, you know, it's just wild. And that those are things, and it's so funny because one of the biggest tropes is like the tamed Amazon, and so the Amazon that like meets a man who can best her, Red Sonja, even though, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, just like this Red Sonja's origin story just like kills me. The idea that you have a man that can best you, and now you must like protect him for the rest of your life and like lay down your life for him and become his wife and partner and raise his babies because he violently subdued you. All right.
I mean, I think it also goes back to this, like, anytime you kind of have something that, like a trope of the other, you know what I mean? I think there's just this constant frustration of just like, but I just want to be treated like a person who is more than one thing. You know what I mean? Like, I would just love that. You know what I mean? It's like, if you could just, you know, like, I don't need to be a gray character. I don't need to be a black and white character. I just need to be multifaceted in an interesting way in which I view myself. You know what I mean? And I think that there's always that frustration. I think also talking about the hag tropes, like, you can also kind of draw it back there. It's just that it's not, yeah, it's not easy. It's not that easy just to say we cast the woman out because she is unclean, you know.
Oh, and she is. She is. Don't go anywhere near her, because literally part of like the hag tropes is that they spread disease just by looking. Just like looking at you, they'll spread disease, and it's like, all right, well, okay. Weirdos.
So I mean, I think we're nearing our time. So I have this last question, but I'll also like open it up if there's anything else you want to talk about that we haven't touched on. But like because it's beyond the trope, like in my mind, I think we've touched on some of these things, but maybe it's a nice sum up. Like beyond the trope, how would we want to change the portrayal of the hag? Or would you change it actually? Maybe that's an interesting one. And if you wouldn't, you know, what unique ways do you think you could see hags used in fiction that haven't been so far, I guess? And I mean, and I guess I'm talking from a Western perspective, because I think we've pretty much broken down that like it's not that easy just to say like they're one thing for one culture or for all cultures. Rachel, we haven't started with you yet. Please go ahead, take the floor.
I don't have anyone to jump off of, but that's okay. I personally like to lean more into like this sort of like, I don't really know if there's like a technical difference between the definition of hag and crone, but in my brain there is. So the idea of like a crone, of like a more neutral figure who like has power, has wisdom, kind of drawing back on like, if you're staying within like the Western tradition, it kind of comes from like the Greek mythology of like, you have these old women with a lot of power who may be helpful, maybe hinder you, where you have like the Grey Sisters or the Fates. And I just think that those characters can be utilized in a more interesting way in a story and a more like complementary or favorable way. But if you are like wanting to have like a very just like evil hag character, I just think each like storyteller who's using that consider like what parts of them are evil or why they are evil or like where the harm is coming from, for two reasons. One, because it can hurt people, like plain and simple. Like it can be racist, it can be ableist, it can come from like really bad places if you don't look into it. And two, just because we've seen it before and it's more interesting to have more variety in these evil characters when you've like kind of seen the same thing over and over again, especially when it comes from a not so great place.
For sure. You know, I was looking into Greek mythology, like you mentioned the crones, and you were mentioning before. I was looking into Greek mythology as we were starting this, and like you know the crone, and I was like, are these two different things? And then I realized like, isn't Medusa kind of one of the
Medusa
original
said
hags?
hag
I was
rights.
thinking about that
Medusa
too.
said
She's like-
hag rights.
She's basically the original hag. She's just like the person who's like, no, dude, get away from me. It's like, and then she's turned into a monster. And I'm like,
Though there are some scholars who do believe she was turned into a monster to give her empowerment to keep men away from her.
I mean, I like that, and that is now what I believe.
That's my
Thank
canon.
you.
I just
That's my canon now too, man.
I just read Madeline Miller's now I'm thinking I got her name wrong, but Circe, which is like a re-examining of the sorceress Circe from the Odyssey,
Yeah.
which is like super great book. If you haven't read it, please check it out, because it kind of also recontextualizes like a lot of what it means to be like a monster as a woman, and the character Scylla from Greek mythology, like the big, what she's a major part of the book, or like the journey that Circe goes on of like what it means to like turn into a monster, and is becoming a monster like that easier or more favorable or more powerful than being a woman in that culture. It's a really, everybody should read it. I think it's great.
Oh, that's so awesome. Good. Yeah, TK, you were already talking, so I will.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry. I came in with hag rights from Medusa.
It's good. I like the panels where people can just talk. Like I prefer those. So like, please.
So like using the hag in a unique way in my game, I like the idea of changing the hag, though I think that the hag personally is so anchored in the mythology of D&D that it's hard to change the hag into something positive. So I'd rather change the society that created the hag. And for one thing, if we have more older women that are like protagonists, or seen as good guys and things like that. They like run their own blacksmith shops and things like that. It will be much less wild when you see a hag, because you've already seen older women, quote unquote ugly women, childless women, things like that, that have sort of normalized the presence of the hag just in general. So now it's just a woman who uses magic. I don't know. That's probably what I would do, is just like increase the visibility of women who share similar traits to the hag, like physically, as opposed to relying on the negative stereotypes and then reversing those to create what is essentially a completely different character. Because a hag could just as easily become a druid.
For sure. For sure. I love that. That's great advice. Paladin.
I don't really know, because I don't want to speak towards what people should be doing in their games, because I don't care to an extent. But I guess the only thing I could say is stop assuming your only interaction with a hag would be one of conflict, or that you even have to have a connection to them in the first place. It feels very trite and feels very boring when you introduce a hag only as a violent opposition, or if you introduce a hag and it has to be involved in the story. It feels exhausting to hear about, and I'm exhausting myself talking about it. Because generally when I see a hag involved, it's usually with very lazy writing of just check out this hag and how I used it. Like, okay, cool. How you're using this, it could have just been someone with spellcasting. Awesome. Please stop talking to me. I'm trying to buy something in the store.
Paladin, your
Ma'am,
mood
this is
about
this is a Wendy's.
yeah, your mood about hags is my mood about 2020. Like you were me in December.
I don't know. I have this thing where I very much don't want to hear about people's games unless I ask. And the times when I hear about games I don't want to hear about generally are in game stores.
I mean, like broadening it to like non-gamification. Is there anything you want to see in fiction that hasn't, like a broadening in fiction that we haven't broached on?
Sure. Neutral portrayals of women. Because there's like I don't know how valid this is, but like the 4 responses of behavior is like fight, flight, fear, or sex. Keeping it PG-13. Um uh and I don't know. I feel like a lot of time women are portrayed in media, it's always you have to come into conflict, or there is going to be the 4th F of sex. Like, I don't know. I've been watching this show where like there's a bunch of heist people, and there's one guy who's always known to be the powerhouse, and he's big and tough. And the one time he comes across someone that he can't instantly like defeat, it's a woman, and they wind up making out later on, and it feels boring.
Gross.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably fine. She's probably into it, but all right. Didn't do anything for me. And I'm the one watching it.
All right. I think that's it. I mean, I don't know, Lisa, were there any questions that, we have like to like scrape the time off. We have 6 minutes. I don't know if there were any questions. But if there aren't, okay, awesome. Well, I think in that case we can close it out. Why don't we go back around and everyone just say one more time where to find you if people are interested in hearing more about your awesome thoughts about things. Paladin?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter under HT Paladin. Please don't find me on Instagram. I don't do anything there.
Rachel?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram sporadically at Ms. Petty Dreadful, and you can find me playing games at Table Goth on Twitch and YouTube.
And TK?
You can find me on Twitter, TK Joins the Fray. And if you like reading free horror stories that are set around my fictional hag character, Auntie, you can read those on my website, tkjreds.com.
Ooh, awesome. And yeah, I'm Liz, and you can find me at Angry Hamster RPG. And please also don't find me on Instagram because it's just for family, so I can post baby pictures. Yeah, everyone, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation, and everyone keep staying tuned for more awesome stuff on ArCONa. Okay.